Hello and welcome to the Shane Show. I'm Shane Connick. So, as we know, the coronavirus pandemic has continued to impact all of us in so many different ways, from students to teachers, all around the world. It's impacting everyone, but specifically focusing in on schools. Teachers and coaches have been met with things that they cannot have even imagined dealing with. Today, we bring in Mr. Daniel DiNozzi. He is a U.S. history teacher and the head coach of the boys varsity tennis team and the JV girls tennis team at Randolph High School in Morris County, New Jersey. So, Mr. DiNozzi, first of all, you obviously started working with the tennis team in the beginning of the spring. And then the next thing you know, you all go off for, at the time, about 2 weeks. And you're probably thinking that the season's going to continue in some way. So in what ways do you communicate with your team as you guys all go off and are home to try and make sure that they're still keeping up or try and making sure that they're all staying together in some way?
Shane, first, thanks for having me. But yeah, I can distinctly remember the last day that we had practice. I think it was a Thursday that we had practice because word had kind of trickled out what was going to wind up happening on Friday. And I remember after practice on Thursday, sitting with some of the seniors being like, okay, we'll probably go away for 2 weeks. And then, you guys, it's going to be on you to stay in shape, to keep yourselves ready to go when we come back, because we're going to come back. And I remember having that as a sentiment that we are going to come back. Because if we didn't, I remember saying we're probably going to be dealing with much larger issues, which wound up being the case. But in the meantime, I remember kind of trying to keep that positive morale that we're going to still have a season. And the NJSIA kind of had always hinted to kind of keep up with keep up with the idea that we would have a season. They would sort of put plans out depending on what the governor was saying was going to be return dates. And I mean, in the meantime, it was just about trying to stay communicated through Teams. Randolph uses Microsoft Teams online to try to, we made an athletic page for the boys tennis team. We just sort of, me and my assistant coach, Don Fritch, we put workouts up, things that we found on YouTube that you could do like around the house, because for the longest time you couldn't even get out on a tennis court. But things that you could do around the house to sort of keep your timing, keep your agility, things that you could do individually to try to be ready whenever we came back. Because I think ultimately every team would have been in that same spot without having the team practices and having been able to be on court with each other. It would have been responsible or it would have been sort of the onus and the responsibility would have been on the athlete individually to, whenever we did get back to that team portion, to be ready as best as they could. So I think we tried to provide our athletes with as many resources to do that as possible.
And with that said, so at that point, once you came to that realization, it was confirmed that there would in fact not be a season. What was your message to the team?
It was hard. I remember I posted that day, and it's tough to communicate how sad you are about that. Like that sort of glimmer of hope, that possibility that there would be a season was sort of, I think, the thing that kept a lot of people going, especially seniors. And I remember I posted something along the lines of like that there wasn't like the proper words to say for that. And that basically, the emotions that you were feeling about having your season canceled and not being able to play this year were real. And I know my assistant, again, Coach Fritch, posted on there that he was feeling them not only as a coach, but as a parent. He has a son who was a senior who played baseball and had the same realization. So it was a real thing. And I think it was tough to say, like, all right, this is the end, because it almost felt like we never got started. And for as much as we were posting those things daily, like now it even felt like, all right, posting those workouts doesn't even have a meaning anymore. So yeah, it was a tough thing to kind of discuss or to even really mention, but we had to do it.
And for as much time, let's say everything would have been normal and you would have been in school this spring the way it is every other year. For as much time you're spending coaching, you're spending even more time teaching. You're a U.S. history teacher at Randolph High School as well. So with that said, it's very hard for students to just be able to go off and be like, okay, we have class high school online now. But as you, a teacher, had to all of a sudden jump right in and try and teach multiple classes, different level classes, U.S. History 1 and 2, online. How did you go? What were some of the techniques that you did to try and keep everyone engaged?
Yeah, it's tough. When we started this as like sort of a 2-week period of like, okay, we'll leave the building for 2 weeks, and that was the original, I guess, plan that was in place. We were lucky that we were sort of given enough heads up that that was a potential possibility from the high school administration, that a lot of history teachers sort of, all right, set out a 2-week plan that even if we didn't have any access to being able to communicate with our students, like, this is what you could do over the next 2 weeks. But as it became evident that this was going to be a much more extended type of learning environment, we had to kind of adjust on the fly. Like, we were, I guess you could say, we bought those 2 weeks worth of time to try to learn some things and learn some techniques that would work online. But it ultimately came down to a lot more sort of rigorous planning. There wasn't as much of a, okay, we'll see where we can end today's lesson by potentially addressing questions or things like that, and maybe not fully getting to where I had anticipated us getting, to ultimately being like, okay, every week this is where we have to be, and sort of planning from there and filling in lessons based on that. I think it, again, the same way that I had mentioned that it took a lot for athletes to have that individual accountability and responsibility, it takes a lot more for students to be able to do the same thing. It's just on the level of, okay, this is a reading that I have to do and try to get out of it what's coming. And if I don't, I'm meeting with my teacher 1 day out of 4 as opposed to 3 days out of 4 with our rotational schedule. And it takes a different type of commitment and responsibility to identify your own weaknesses or things that you don't understand, and saying, okay, I need to ask about this, or I need to reach out to my teacher. It's much more what you would do in college. I mean, I'm sure you're kind of going through that now at Maryland, where it's sort of the onus is on you to sort of take responsibility for your own education, and then figure out, okay, what do I need to learn more of, and reach out to my professors that way. And to do that in high school takes a lot of discipline. And so from the teaching end, I feel like I just had to be extra on top of what was going on, and extra tuned into what could potentially happen, or what could potentially be a area of misunderstanding for my students, and try to address those in general, because it's tough when you're teaching to a screen. And one of the most valuable things I think that every teacher learned throughout this process was the fact that one of the things we rely on most is being face-to-face, because there's a different sort of communication that you get from a student who doesn't understand something as opposed to who does understand something. And sometimes it's literally just on your face. You can see a student who's not quite understanding something and might be uncomfortable with asking a question, and then you can circulate to them later. And I think that that's something that's completely lost through teaching to a screen. You don't get to see everybody's face in the same way. You don't get to see students asking friends about a thing that they might not have understood that their friend did, and then their friend could help them. It's so much more individually based that it presents its own set of challenges.
And it has to be incredibly tough, because the same way you're not really interacting with the students in the same way, they're not interacting with each other. Sometimes maybe they might just stay after class and ask a question or something, and now you're losing the ability to do that. And if you want to ask a question, it's more of a official individual message than it would have been otherwise, or even close to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that's the biggest thing that students missed in this process. And I think that we took surveys at the end of the school year to try to see what worked and what didn't, and if this is a potential thing that's going to happen in the future, how we can improve it. And one of the things that I found throughout my surveys was that students really do miss that interaction with not just each other, but with their teacher, right? And I think that that's something too that I have to be conscious of. If come September, if this is a reality that's going to continue to happen, okay, I have to structure lessons that are intentionally designed to have people interact with each other.
And so, being a U.S. history teacher specifically, another big issue that we're seeing in today's world outside of the coronavirus are all of the racial tensions. And we see a lot of things going around, but some people are saying things about the way that American history could be taught. Now, as a history teacher yourself for several years, and as an avid history fan, I know, what's your response to when people kind of question the way that American history could be presented?
I think that it's a fair criticism. I think that, I mean, anytime that people have a concern with something, that they should absolutely voice that concern and criticize it, because then that leads to the change that you would like to see. I mean, as somebody who teaches history, I feel like there's ways to present any person as a complex individual. And that's not to offer a defense for things that they've done, but to be able to fairly evaluate, say, somebody even like George Washington. You get taught that he is the first president, but you also have to teach that he was somebody who did own slaves. And I think that it's fair to have those same conversations, because ultimately that's the type of discussion and that's the type of education that leads to people trying to perfect the world that they're living in. I think that that's ultimately what people want, is a better vision for the world. And I think that sort of starts with the process of education.
Mr. DiNozzi, always appreciate talking to you. Thank you for coming on today to this episode of The Shane Show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this edition of The Shane Show. See you next time. Catch you on the flip side.